Elliott, we're going to have another great show today. We're going to have on my favorite player of all time growing up. I remember watching him play. This guy was absolutely incredible till he broke my heart in '84 when when the Padres beat the Cubs in the playoffs. Former baseball star Steve Garvey. We're going to have Greg the Bull Lazinski. But let's get right to our first guest, Steve Garvey. How are you doing today, Mr. Garvey?
Great, you were going great until all of a sudden, you kind of went backwards there a little bit, but that's okay.
I don't understand how.
Start to relive that past. Okay.
That's what Cub fans do.
That's true. It's interesting. Who knows how many thousand days since that Game 4 and the walk-off home run, but I think most of them, a Cubs fan has come up and said, "How could you do that to us? You seem like a nice guy." And I always look at him and go, "Hey, Lee Smith hit my bat. I like Chicago. I've had a business there," and I like to say, everybody starts to laugh. So it's just one of those moments in time, and unfortunately for you guys, it happened to be against the Cubs.
One of your best acquisitions was from Wheaton, though.
Absolutely, Candace Garvey. We've been married over 25 years now, and she's not afraid to say she's always a Cubs fan. Once a Cubs fan, always a Cubs fan. And there have been times, I was almost a Cub. When I was a free agent, and after the '82 season, I went to 5 different places and to negotiate. And when I was in Chicago there with Dallas Green, it looked like I was going to be a Cub, and things kind of didn't materialize at the end, and I moved on. But Dallas had made up a Cubs jersey with Garvey 6 on the back, and I didn't think anything about it. Went on to New York, and then eventually signed with the Padres and Ray Kroc. And about 4 years ago, I guess, my sister-in-law saw it on eBay, and she paid something like $2,000 for it or something. Gave it to my wife for Christmas. And then, if you remember, a few years ago, the Dodgers played the Cubs in the first round of the playoffs, and she wore it very proudly at Wrigley Field. So, and it was in the Sun Times, I think.
Right.
So she's always a Cub.
It's one of those priceless items, right?
Absolutely.
I remember I was, in '83, I was 12 years old, and I used to write to Dallas Green. I wrote him a letter saying, "You got to sign Steve Garvey. You got to do it." And he wrote me back, goes, "We're in negotiations. I'm going to do whatever I can to get it done." I still have that letter.
Well, I could have swore that at one point within 24 hours, I was going to be a Cub. Things had progressed to that much, and I'd always loved playing at Wrigley, and was thinking in terms of, gosh, maybe with another couple of acquisitions, the Cubs could put it all together. And with irony, they ended up having a great season in '84, but just ran into to my Padres team that put it all together with 3 games at home.
Can you still envision the pitch from Lee Smith?
Well, I didn't have much luck against him. I think I faced him 8 times and struck out 6. It seemed like every time I faced him, it was in the shadows at Wrigley at 4:30 in the afternoon. And I didn't think he was going to fool around with me. And first pitch was a running fastball away. Tony Gwynn had led off the inning with a single. And I thought, well, he's got to come back, with another fastball. And it was out of the plate. And I was a pretty good center to right field hitter, and hit through it. And as it went up, I thought it had a chance. And I'm getting to first base, and I look and I see Henry Cotto climbing the fence and leaping up. And I thought, oh my Lord, the greatest catch in postseason history. And it landed about 4 or 5 feet, I guess, over his glove on the wall. And it was pandemonium after that.
Growing up, you played football and baseball, and then you went to Michigan State. Did you ever think to yourself, what, maybe I should play football rather than baseball?
Well, when I played there, it was 66, 67. It was still, a lot of running and maybe 15 passes a game. So I went there as a quarterback, but I played defense in high school, so I ended up a corner for Duffy Daugherty. And every Saturday, unless we played at Notre Dame or Houston, I was taking on, 280, 300-pound pulling guards and tackles. So by the time I get drafted by the Dodgers in the first round, I had to make what I call an IQ decision. Should I keep getting run over by these big guys or sign with the Dodgers? And it turned out to be a pretty easy decision.
Okay. I have a question. You played high school ball in Florida. How does a guy not end up in the SEC and ends up in the Big Ten? I didn't know that those recruiters would let those guys out of the South.
I know, but at that time, you got to remember it was, 66 in that time, and it was just beginning to be a philosophy of these colleges to have players be one-dimensional. And a lot of players played football and baseball, and a few played basketball and baseball. So I would say of the 25 offers, 18 of them were just for one sport. So I had Florida State baseball, Florida football, Miami baseball, Auburn football, and but I had a pitching coach at my high school who had played for Danny Litweiler at Florida State, and Danny went on to Michigan State in 1965, I think.
Right.
So he called Danny and he said, got this kid down here that can play two sports, and he wants to play both, and you might be able to get him. And they called me up, and my mother and I went up for a visit, and then Duffy Daugherty, the great Irish coach, got us cornered and charmed us, and I thought, let's see, I'm tired of losing 8 pounds a game in Florida with humidity and heat. And they say I can play two sports. And then Duffy said, listen, we got over 20,000 co-eds. You're bound to get a date on Friday night. So the stars aligned in the Midwest, and I ended up going there.
Were you in that great game in '66 with Notre Dame and Michigan State?
I was, it was the closest to not actually taking the field because I was a freshman. And during the week, I played Terry Henready in practice. Because I played at a school in Florida that was very similar to their offense. And Bubba Smith and those guys just beat the heck out of me for 4 days. And I was on the sidelines, for that game. And it was the hardest hitting game I'd ever seen. And, of course, it ended in a 10-10 tie. But I was pleading with the guys, please win this one. I've sacrificed my body all week long. Just win this game. And then to see Eric Parsegian kind of run out the clock and then go to USC next week and win, I think, 51 or 54 to nothing, to win or really share the national championships.
When you got drafted by the Dodgers, what went through your mind?
Well, the story goes back to the spring of 1956, and I'm growing up in Tampa, and my dad's working for Greyhound, and he and my mom had been from New York, and Dad was a Brooklyn fan, Mom was a Yankee fan, and he comes home in late March of '56, which was Grapefruit League exhibition time, and he sat down at the table, and I was an only child, so I'm sitting there, and he looks at me and says, "You want to skip school tomorrow?" Yeah. What are we going to do, Dad? He says, "Well, I got a charter tomorrow to pick up the Brooklyn Dodgers from the Tampa airport and take them to St. Pete to play the Yankees an exhibition game, and I think it might be a fun day for you and I." So I looked at him, I said, "Can I be excused?" And he said, "Why?" So I ran into my room, and I just started collecting baseball cards, and I had a Reese, and I had a Snyder, and a Ferrello, and a Hodges, and a Jackie Robinson, and came back, and he said, "Well, let me tell you about these guys." So he told me about each one of them. Of course, Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier, and he said, "Tomorrow's going to be a special day." He says, "So you dress nice." Well, I got my best blue jeans and kind of a Dodger blue bandline shirt. We got up the next morning, got the bus, drove to the tarmac of the airport, and about 8:15, 8:30, the Dodger plane, the K. O'Malley 1, landed, and it taxied up, and there were no concourses back then. They pushed the ramp up, and the door opened, and off came Walter Alston, the great manager, and these great Dodgers who had beaten the Yankees the previous fall in '55. And my dad and I were standing in the front of the bus, and I got my little butch waxed flat top at the time, and they would come by, and the guys would kind of pat me on the head. They couldn't believe it was sticking that straight out. So, and then finally, the last two guys were Campanella and Robinson, and they stopped, and Jackie Robinson looked at me and said, "You like baseball, son?" And I had my mitt, on my belt. I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, you work hard, and maybe someday you'll be a Dodger." And I kind of nodded, and then Roy Campanella just came off his third MVP, looks at my dad. And my dad had this Greyhound name tag, Joe. And he says, "Joe," he says, "you a pretty good student?" My dad said, "Yeah, not bad." I was the worst reader in class. I was hyper. I probably had ADHD, but nobody used that term back then. And he said, "But we're working with him. Every night we work on his reading." And Roy said, "Well, that's good." And he looks at me and he says, "Well, son, you can practice all you want, but you got to be able to think on that field." I said, "Yes, sir. Yes, Mr. Campbell." And they patted me on the head and got on the bus. And the rest is history. I bat-boyed for the Brooklyn Dodgers that day and fell in love with the team. And then, of course, about 12 years later, out of Michigan State, I get drafted by them. And 15 years in L.A. and another 5 in San Diego, and I have a very long and blessed career.
Did your dad forgive him for leaving Brooklyn?
Oh, yeah, he did. But, it was inevitable, just as things are in this new millennium and changes in the game, that, a team or two was going to eventually go west and set up shop on the West Coast. But Walter O'Malley was very shrewd, and he was always fighting with Horace Stoneham, who was the owner of the Giants. And O'Malley sneaks out to the West Coast, and he knew that L.A. was a bigger market, bigger business center, and he does a deal with quietly with the fathers here in Los Angeles and Union Oil to build a stadium. And he comes back, and he coyly at a lunch tells a couple of his buddies that he's really looking at San Francisco. He really thinks San Francisco would be great for the Dodgers. Well, he knew that they were going to sneak and tell Stoneham, so that's when Stoneham hears about it, gets on a plane, goes to San Francisco, does a deal with the San Francisco fathers there in the council, and they coerce him to go out to this cold, windy point called Candlestick, and the rest is history. But O'Malley was so shrewd because he knew he needed, another team out there, and why not his fiercest competitor? And so he had that Dodger-Giant rivalry on the West Coast, and
right.
And it's a much longer story, but it tells a lot about how wise and smart O'Malley was.
Yeah, I mean, one team out there just doesn't do it, and to have the arch rival maintain that New York City rivalry on the West Coast.
Yeah, can't beat it.
No.
Yeah.
You didn't spend much time in the minor leagues. What was your minor league experience like?
Well, after a very good sophomore spring at Michigan State, I won All-American honors. And the Dodgers drafted me in the first round. I had the choice either to stay in the Florida State League with Daytona Beach or go to Ogden, Utah. And Guy Wellman, who lives in Downers Grove and a great gentleman, one of the greatest scouts in not only Dodger but baseball history, was there to sign me in Tampa. And he said, well, I think we want you to go to Ogden. There's a manager there that's good with young guys and energetic, and this might be a good place for you. Well, it turned out to be Tommy Lasorda. And that draft had Bobby Valentine and Bill Buckner and Tom Paciorek and Say and Lopes and Charlie Huff, and arguably one of the great drafts in history. And we all go out to Ogden, and we have a short season. I think a 60-game schedule, and we win the Pioneer League for Lasorda, and we learn what it's all about to be a professional and have a guy that's up 100% of the time, and telling him that you got to bleed Dodger blue. So that first summer was quite an education for all of us guys.
Were there many Italian restaurants for Tommy to go to in Ogden?
Not enough. There was one buffet that we still talk about today. It was 99 cents, and most of the time, Tommy got the manager to comp 4 or 5 of the dinners for his favorites, like Valentine, Buckner, and I. We used to say, Tommy, it's $1 for the buffet. We don't mind. We get $3 a day meal.
Right. You can pocket the rest.
Keep your money. It's principle here. We're coming in. But it was a wonderful summer, and then the next year I spent about 70 games at Albuquerque AA, because in my contract with the Dodgers I had that I would go back and complete my year at Michigan State and just take the 2 weeks for Easter break and go to spring training. So I go to Albuquerque, which was AA, then Texas League, and play 70 games there, and then the next spring, I kind of win the third base job, and though it was a rocky year, I was up and down. So, I really played about 200 minor league games, which is not a lot. And fortunately, at that time, the Dodgers needed hitting, and a bunch of us were coming up.
Yeah. Now, of that group, Bobby Valentine was probably one of the most heralded, and he's the guy that didn't make it.
Yeah. Well, Bobby he was a great athlete, All-American tailback out of Stamford, Connecticut. was going to SC along with Bill Buckner, and just had great tools. But as with anything, he had a series of injuries, and one of them probably was the turning point when he made a tremendous catch when he was with the Angels, and his cleat stuck into the tarp in center field, and he broke his ankle and tibia, and never did quite come back from that, even though he put in probably, I think, 5, 6, 7 years. But he had tremendous talent. He's the first guy I ever saw that literally scored, tagged up at second base on a fly to just normal center field and scored standing up. So you don't see that very often.
No.
But we had, and a lot of those guys went on to play in Spokane in '70 when I was up and down. And that team was voted the greatest minor league team in the last 75 years. And we had, I believe, 11 guys along with Lasorda that played over 10 years in the majors. So that team was a phenomenal team also. But it was all part of the Dodger way to play baseball and how much we really worked on fundamentals and the keys to the game.
What was Walter Alston like as a manager?
Hall of Famer in many ways. He wasn't loud and demonstrative, and kind of like Tommy was, but he was quiet. He watched. When he said something, you listened because he never minced words. He was going to tell you something was going to help you be a better ball player, and he only had a few rules. Get in on time, don't stay out too late, get the signs, and run hard and play hard in every play. And he taught us how to be men, really. So that first 7 years of my career, I had Walt, and then Tommy took over in '77, and I had him until I went to San Diego, and then I played for Dick Williams, who ended up in the Hall of Fame. So I was blessed to play for 3 Hall of Fame managers.
Yeah, I remember Walter Alston. I can't think of a handful of times that he would have left the dugout to argue. He was sort of the polar opposite of a Lasorda.
Yeah, he didn't want to waste time going out there. He always believed that, and listen, in his heart, he knew that the umpire had made a mistake. And even then, when he went out there, once in a while he'd get thrown out, but it was a purpose throw out. He went out there to get the team going and have us look at him and go, "Hey, look at the skipper." He's really mad. But he was 6'3" and extremely strong, and he always had the respect of the umpires. And actually, when he went out there, most of the umpires, felt like they were going to get a paternal lecturing about whether they were out of position, didn't see it properly, or were they a little biased, and so forth. So, and when Tommy went out, Tommy would run out there and he was chewing tobacco, and a lot of it juice had come out. And, I can't tell you the number of times he got thrown out in the minor leagues, quite a few in the major leagues. But we're in the entertainment business, and Tommy was the great entertainer, and Walt was more the professor that put these teams together and managed them to world championships, as did Tom. There are different ways to get to the Fall Classic and to win it, and both of those guys showed that their method works.
As a rookie, you accomplished something that I think very few have, and that is you had a Vitalis ad. And for those people who don't know Vitalis, it was a hair grooming product like Wild Root was, like Bro Cream was. How did you land that so early in your career?
You're talking about the greaseless groomer, aren't you?
Yeah, other than having a good head of hair.
That was the tagline. Yeah. Well, in '70, like I mentioned, I somehow win the third base job in spring training. Got a chance to go on a couple trips and got in and got hits, and all of a sudden one thing led to another, and now I'm the third baseman, and the team's still not very good, but they figure, well, let's take a chance on these 2 kids. Bill Buckner was the other one. And we're going to open the season at home. And 3 days before, we're at Dodger Town, or 4 days before. And Red Patterson, the great publicist, comes up and he says, "You want to do a commercial?" I looked at him, "Wow, yeah, what is it?" He said, "Well, it's Vitalis." And I had used Vitalis, and most guys did. So they're going to shoot it the day before the season opens in L.A., and he says, "You're their guy." That's great. So I get to the stadium at 9 in the morning the day before, and we're going to play the Angels that night. We used to have a freeway series. and the director and producer out there, and they say, okay, we want you to lead off first and slide head first in the second. Make sure your helmet comes off. And Pete Rose, who was playing second, then is going to catch the ball, tag your head, and the umpire is going to call safe, and then Pete's going to say, but Harry Wendelstedt, the umpire, feel the glove, and Harry's going to feel the glove in my hair, and he's going to go, kid, you're out of here. And then I walk to the dugout, and there's Maury Wills with a bottle of Vitalis. He goes, kid, if you want to make it in the major leagues, you got to use the greaseless groomer, Vitalis. So we, I lead off, and Pat Corrales is the catcher, and there's the pitch and throw down, and it's a high one. So Pete jumps up, and I slide in head first, and he comes down, and his foot lands on my right hand. Ouch. And I thought, oh my Lord. And the spikes actually went between my fingers, and he just landed on it flush. And I got up, and I'm thinking, I'm afraid to look. And I looked, and nothing was, cut or anything. And the director goes, all right, let's do it again. I'm thinking, here it is. I'm going to start for the first time ever tomorrow night, and I'm almost getting my fingers chopped off for a Vitalis commercial. And the next one was perfect. And Pete, of course, delivers his lines, and Harry does his, and we're all set. And the director says, well, let's do another one. And we all look at him, we go, that's as good as it gets. And I said, that's it for me. I'm not risking my hands again. So he goes, okay, he checks. We got in the can. Now the last scene is me walking up to Maury Wills. And I say to the director, well, what are my lines? He said, well, son, he said, you're not going to have any lines in this one. He said, this is method acting. You're going to look at Maury. We're going to show you. You're going to shake your head in that little chagrin, and you go into the dugout. I said, are you sure you don't want any lines? He looks at me and says, son, we're paying you. We don't want any. So the commercial's actually on YouTube. If you go on there, okay. Garvey Vitalis, it'll come up. But that was my baptism into the commercial world.
Were you a better third baseman than Ron, say?
Ronnie, turned out to be an exceptional third baseman. And if Mike Schmidt wasn't around, he probably would have won some Gold Gloves. But, I was very athletic at third. I caught everything, but I had a shoulder separation in Michigan State playing football. I never quite threw the same again. So I got to every ball, but then it was, watch out. Who knows where it's going to go? Of course, I had a great first baseman in Wes Parker, but he couldn't live. He couldn't even jump 20 feet in the air. So eventually, Ron comes up in 73, and he solidifies a position, and I'm a guy without a position. I'm really kind of the 24th guy on the team, and all I'm doing is pinch hitting early in the year. They tried me in left, and of course I've got a pretty short arm for an outfielder, and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden I'm leading the league in pinch hitting on June 23rd of 1973, and we lose the first game of a doubleheader against Cincinnati, who were our big rivals at that time, and I'd gotten one of the two hits, pinch hit, and Walter Alston, that same manager that came off the plane when I was 7, was starting to walk by me in the clubhouse, and he stops and he looks at me and says, hey, kid, you ever play first? And I looked at him and I said, oh, sure, Skipper. Well, I played one game in Little League, one game in Triple A. I had a bad hamstring.
That counts.
Yeah. And he says, well, get a glove and get out there and don't trip over the bag and get a couple of hits. He said, we're having trouble against lefties. See what you can do. So I borrowed a glove and went out and grabbed the bat boy and tossed with him and told him to throw a couple at my feet. And went out and got a couple of doubles. Doug went out of the dirt and came off the bag and tagged a runner. And we won the game. And, it's a moment in your life. And there may be one of them, two of them, or periodic, where you have this great satisfaction that you've done something that you didn't anticipate, but you made a commitment, you saw it through. And I'm sitting there, and Alston comes by, and he doesn't even look at me. He just says, you're in there tomorrow. And I look up, and he turns back, and he smiles. And that was the beginning of really my first base career, the beginning of the infield coming together. That stayed together for almost 9 years. And I look back, and I do a lot of motivational speaking, and I always say, there are moments in our lives where we just have to take a chance. And at that moment, I said, oh, absolutely. If I had said, no, I've never played there, might not be with you guys today. it might not have worked out, but I did, and the rest is history.
I mean, you win a Gold Glove your first full year at first base.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that had to do with, being kind of a two-sport guy, being a defensive back, footwork and having good eye-hand coordination and being aggressive. And I won 4 straight. And ironically, then that left-handed first baseman, Hernandez, came around. And then 84, I go a whole season with that hair, I don't win a Golden Glove. So I think it's subjective sometimes, but those 4 Golden Gloves are very dear to me, and I'm very honored to have earned them.
Who had better hair, you or Keith Hernandez?
Better hitter?
Better hair.
Oh, yeah. Better hair. I don't know. Both dark, But I always said, people always say, what would you do differently? And I always say, it would have been easier as a left-handed first baseman. There are just more plays naturally that work for a left-handed first baseman. And then I think about it for a second, and I look at the interviewer or whomever, and I said, but you know what? I'm not going to try it over again just to be a left-handed first baseman. I said, everything worked out pretty well. I'll take that career.
1974 All-Star Game, you were a write-in starter. Last time that's happened, probably it never will ever again. How gratifying was that?
Well, it was to have earned that first base position, throughout the rest of '73, and then start out in '74 and get a good start, and numbers are in the top 10 in several categories, and the team's doing well. And there's a groundswell that starts in Tampa, Florida, my hometown, to write in my name. And when it's all said and done, I have over 1 million, write-in votes, and I get to start the game. And even though I had the mumps 5 days before the actual game, and was able to get out of bed and go out there and win the MVP, and that was my first big moment in baseball, and one that's so very special because of the way I got there in the first place, and then took a lot of pride in being able to push myself through it, and one thing leading to another. And of course, my first 2 at bats, I get hits, and now it's the bottom of the 5th inning, I think, and Yogi Berra, who's a manager, was going to just take me out after 2 at bats. And he says, well, kid, great job. We're going to get you out of here. And I said, Yogi, who are you going to put in? He says, well, I'm going to put in Perez. And I said to him, well, you use Perez as a pinch hitter. And he says, and he looks at me, he goes, well, Stargell then. And I said, well, he got a hit and you ran for him. And then he looks at me and goes, anybody else? I said, no. He says, well, you're in there the whole game. So I was the only guy to play the whole game for both teams, on both sides, and end up winning the MVP. And it was probably the sickest going into that game than anybody else. But that was a true Yogiism. This guy, that guy, nah, anybody left? Nah, see him. So it was fun.
One of your accomplishments was an incredible consecutive game streak. Now, people think, okay, all he's got to do is show up at the ballpark every day, but it's not as simple as that. 1, you have to be healthy, and 2, if you're not healthy, you have to be healthy enough to get on the field and perform. How daunting was that entire experience?
Well, I had finally gotten traction in my career. I won the MVP. I had solid years in 75, 76. But I always wanted to play every game. I never wanted to be Wally pipped, as they say, with Carrick. And so I loved playing and played with hairline fractures and migraine headaches and this and that. But when it was all said and done, that 7.5 years there, 1,207 games, which is a National League record and 4th all time, is something that I've really taken a lot of pride in. It's right up there with winning a world championship as far as accomplishments. So it's not easy, and like you said, you got to be ready every day. You got to get out there. You got to avoid serious injury, but more importantly, you got to perform. So I think during that 74 to probably 83 period there, I was as consistent as anybody, and I think that's one of the reasons why at times where maybe Lasorda could have taken me out, but he was gracious enough to ask me, and I said, I think I can go out and still perform, with this bad hamstring or my fingers, going a little different direction here. And he let me make the decision. So I always give Tommy credit and Walter Alston for the beginning of it.
Was that 78 championship series, you think, your best championship series?
Oh, I put it all together, and I was very fortunate to have, I think, very good LCS and LCSs. And ended up batting, I think, 350-something, 360. And then once I got to the World Series, all of a sudden I didn't quite see those pitches anymore, which is understandable. But that 78 NLCS was probably my best. 74 was my baptism. 77 was pretty good also, but eventually ended up with the first of the two back-to-back Yankee losses, and of course Reggie with his 3 home runs, and what I call the classic World Series, Yankees-Dodgers.
Yeah.
But then to get a chance again in 81 and beat the dreaded Yankees and finally win a World Championship was kind of pretty much the icing of the cake of that, what we call that golden era from 73 to 82.
Yeah. Now, when I was a kid growing up in St. Louis, I thought the World Series was between Brooklyn and New York. It wasn't until
right.
Milwaukee won that somebody else can be in it. So it's a long-standing World Series history.
Yeah, but the Cardinals, arguably too, with the Dodgers and the Yankees, 3 of the greatest organizations ever. So I think you saw a lot of victories there. And then I would say over the last 15 years, the Cardinals have done a tremendous job also.
Number 6, has that been your number ever since you were a youngster, or how did you end up with that?
No, I was 14 in high school and 10 at Michigan State, and then I wore 5 at Ogden. And when I got up to the Dodgers on September 1st, 1969, they called me up with a few of the other guys for the month. Nobi Kawana, the great clubhouse man for the Dodgers, been there a long time, had remembered me as a bat boy and gave me a low number and gave me number 6. So I knew that Carl Furillo had worn that number and Ron Fairley had worn it nobly in Los Angeles before me, and I was very honored to have gotten that number.
I still remember that 1981 season. It was my 10th birthday's coming up, and I said, I got to see my favorite team, the Dodgers, play with Steve Garvey. And I said, Dad, we got to go. He said, okay, you can take the kids in your class of 10 boys. What game do I pick? Fernando Valenzuela's first game coming to Chicago when he was undefeated. And my dad goes, Dave, I'm not going to be able to get tickets. I said, Dad, you promised. Somehow he managed to get tickets for that game, and all I remember is Mike Tyson hitting that home run.
Yeah. It was an unbelievable time to watch Fernando go through that streak that he had in the beginning of 81 there. But we kind of feared Wrigley Field because you never knew if the wind was blowing in or out, and day baseball and all the things that happened there. I know one time at Wrigley we played 18 innings of runless baseball, 0-0. The last out in the bottom of the 18th, the ball was hit. I never saw it, and I just heard a thud and looked at Steve Sack at second base, and he was looking at his glove as if I can't believe it's in there. And then the next day we score in the top of the 21st and win 1-0. So that's what happens at Wrigley. Things like that happen. So Fernando going in there was we're a little uneasy about that.
They just broke that record yesterday for the longest game. They mentioned that Dodger game with the Cubs back in the early 80s.
Yeah, and the irony was that Jerry Royce was going to start the game, the next day, and we went to 18 innings, and the continuation was going to start at noon. And Tom said to Jerry, "Say how you feel?" He says, "Oh, I feel good." He says, "Well, start this game. Let's see if we can get it over, and then if we win, then you're warm and you can go out there and see what you can do." So he gave us 3 good innings. We score on a bang play at home plate with sacks, and 30 minutes later, Royce goes out and I think he does 5 2/3, and we won that one. So he won 2 games in one day. So
Not bad.
Not bad.
Who was the toughest pitcher you ever faced?
Well, I was fortunate to, I think, face 12 or 13 Hall of Fame pitchers, and obviously twice that many that were very, very good. But I always say Phil Necro, because he threw that very difficult knuckleball, and he didn't know where it was going, and the catcher didn't know where it was going, and you're supposed to hit it. So I was more of a guesstimator as a hitter. I used to watch patterns and pitchers' deliveries and situations, and I could pretty well guesstimate 80-85% of the time what's coming. But the knuckleball, you just threw it up there, and depending on how humid it was or where the wind was blowing, made it so very, very difficult.
Did you guys have the best food in your clubhouse when Tommy Lasorda was the manager?
That's a good question. We got the best Italian food, that's for sure.
He liked that Cuban food too, I heard. I forgot Tony Perez was mentioning he ate some Cuban food, and he mulatto, or I can't think what it was called, mufada.
Yeah, something like that. Well, Tampa, growing up in Tampa was there was a significant Cuban population there. That's where they made the cigars, and they had some great restaurants. Columbia Restaurant, Las Novedades was another one. Great Cuban food, and it was a little different for me. I was my parents out in New York. I was a meat and potatoes kid, but the clubhouse with Yosh and as the clubhouse man there at Wrigley Field, he always gave us a good Polish sausage every time we came there. So we could look forward to that.
You played with some Hall of Famers, and you also encountered another Hall of Famer on a daily basis in broadcaster Vin Scully, who just decided that he wants to do another season in 2015. What's it like to be interviewed by? Yeah, what's it like to be interviewed by Vin Scully?
Well, he's the consummate professional, and if you were to listen to him, you never hear we or us. You hear an announcer who paints a beautiful verbal picture on a palette from the beginning to the end, and fills in with wonderful, little snippets of stories and little longer stories sometimes, but insight. And he's just been, the Pope of the Dodger Airways for all these years, and as long as he wants to go on the air, the more we get this jewel of a man and a voice to talk Dodger baseball.
What was Jackie Robinson like? Did you get to meet him a lot of times?
I saw him twice. That day I was a bat boy the first one, and he literally sat on top of me on the bench, and he apologized, and I'm thinking, Mr. Robinson, that's okay. You can sit on my lap. I got a great story for show and tell tomorrow in school. And then I met him one more time, but always a gentleman, and arguably the man that really changed the face of segregation and integration in our society in the last half of the 20th century.
Then you also saw another historic moment in '74 when Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's record. What was that like?
Well, he got close. He got 714 in Cincinnati. And we go into Atlanta, and there was this great anticipation and tremendous number of press there. And Al Downing, who pitched him quite well, was on the mound that night and got behind, and the ball took off. And I thought, this looks like it has enough. That Fulton County Stadium in Atlanta was a really hitter's ballpark. And then I see Bill Muchter climbing the fence, and I knew it was it. And by the time I wanted to turn around and shake his hand, he was already even with me and had gone by. And then I saw poor Buck get out hustled by Tom House, a relief pitcher for the Braves, to get the ball, and that was the moment. And then, of course, you sit there and you absorb, what's happening with the crowd and the fireworks and the magic of this historical moment. And it was great to be on the field that day.
At what point did you decide to become a motivational speaker?
Let me just back up 1 second. I was pretty fortunate to have a great seat for a number of events. One was, the other one was Pete Rose's record-breaking hit. and Reggie Jackson's 3 home runs in the World Series. So I've had a great seats to these baseball games and history. But they've always also been a source of comments and injections into my speeches as individuals who were able to transcend the passion for the sport and the commitment to the sport by rising to an occasion to do something that is truly historical. And guys like Aaron and Rose and Jackson are in the Hall of Fame for a reason. It's that they did these things more often than most, and they led their teams to championships.
Why are you not in the Hall of Fame? I still don't understand that. I mean, you had 10 All-Star games, 4 Gold Gloves, the MVPs. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, I hope so. I've been on the veterans ballot for a while now, and I got more votes than any player this past December. Of course, the 3 managers went in. I'll be up again December of 2015, and I hope at that time that finally the voters, and there's a compilation of about 16 men and women now, will finally start to put in some of these players in my category, like a Dave Parker and so forth, that they really deserve to be in. I mean, the numbers and their contribution during their time really signify that they should be included and go through the gates at Cooperstown there. But we'll just have to wait and see. I think the whole voting process now, dealing with the steroid era, makes it very, very complicated. But this veterans era and the special one from I think 70 to 90 is one that could allow a few of us in there, and it'd be great for the Hall and great for us.
Well, and the statistical inflation that's occurred since your playing days, people can say, oh, he only had this many home runs, or, whatever they want to look at. There's no comparison that a home run was much more difficult to hit when you were playing than it is nowadays.
Well, I think the key is that each era inherently has a different style to it. The ball may be livelier, it may be better. But that era in itself, you have to look at the top players and pitchers and teams and the numbers and what they did. And when you start to compare my era with the following era and steroids, then it becomes very convoluted. And what happens is you start to lose writers like the Dick Youngs and writers like that who pass away, who saw you play, where the younger writers didn't, and simply go by the numbers. And there's a dramatic difference in the steroid era by the numbers that were put up. So I think it's important to stay within a generation and look at the numbers, look how the player contributed to his team, how his team, contributed to baseball, and I think it was pretty significant. The Dodgers and in my era back in 73 to 88.
Another guy who's forgotten is a former Cardinal, Reggie Smith, who had great numbers, but again, people forget about him.
Yeah, and once you don't get 5% of the vote the first time you're on with the baseball writers, then you're off for good. So you really have to get a little traction right from the beginning and try to sustain it. And I've always thought if a guy doesn't make it in his first couple of years, then how can he make it 14 years later? Except through the grace of God and through finally writers having the realization that they've overlooked a player. And a lot of times there's themes that go on with voting, but I seem to think that the voting is going to start to change somewhat. They've already gone from 15 years to 10 on the ballot, and I'd just like to see that the Hall of Fame start to be a little more inclusive instead of exclusive, because if you look at the NBA and the NFL, it probably each year when they put in 4 or 5 guys, all of them really deserve it. So, and I think that could be the same case for baseball and Cooperstown.
Yeah. Well, I think what's cruel is, there should be veterans going in every year rather than, okay, we'll meet every couple of years or so. Nobody's getting any younger that I know of.
Yeah. Well, that's true, and you start to see the managers get in right away, and I do think you're right when we talk about veterans. Time does march on, and it's nice to if you do have a chance, and through the grace of God you're put in, that you get a chance to be a foot soldier and a spokesman for the Hall and for baseball.
I always pictured you managing. Do you ever think to yourself, you know what, I want to be the next Walter Alston or Tommy Lasorda?
Well, I've always had more of an inclination to the business side, and a couple of years ago when the Dodgers were bankrupt and for sale, I put a group together, and when I do lecture, it's and people ask me about it, I say one of the great accomplishments of my life was raising $1.4 billion, and then I pause and say, but we lost by $700 million. But it makes a statement. You really, at the end of the day, can't overcome the resources of the hedge fund, and I applaud Guggenheim. They did a great campaign and came up with 2.15, and they looked at the numbers for the next cable television deal, which that contract was $8.3 billion for 25 years, and of course they're struggling now because they're having problems getting it on all of cable, meaning DirecTV or Cox. So they did their numbers, and I applaud them, and the team's in pretty good shape. They're paying $230 million this year for salaries, so they better win.
If you go a little farther south, you could probably pick up that team for under $1 billion, the Padres.
Yeah, the Padres were purchased by some members of the Seidler and O'Malley family. Peter O'Malley, Walter O'Malley,
and you could probably be
was involved in the Seidlers, so they have a majority ownership down there. It's a little different market, a little more difficult down there. They don't own the stadium and some of the parking, so it's a different equation. But every time you go down to Petco, I just love it, and I love the people down there, and had a great 5 years, and I would be more than willing to help them if they ever need it.
And with the Padres' lack of hitting, you could either be their starting first baseman or at least a pinch hitter.
One of you guys is going to have to run for me, that's for sure. If they bring in a designated runner from home plate, I'm back. I can still hit the right. Well, my son Ryan is with the Rocky organization now, and he's in his second full season playing for the Tri-City team in the Northwest. So he and my 15-year-old's going to be a sophomore in high school. The Garvey guys that can run now and have a good arm. So it's fun to watch them.
How many home runs could you have hit in Colorado?
Oh, Lord. They're doing a bobblehead tomorrow night of the four of us that hit 30 home runs in a season for the first time. Say and Baker and Smith and myself. And we always kid around. If we played in Denver, we would have been the first four to hit 40 in one season. So,
maybe 50.
But that was quite an accomplishment. Yeah, quite an accomplishment. But, and the bobbleheads, they even look like us, which is nice.